The pirates. So that's what happened. Miles finishes explaining over the comm as Sai steers the ship into orbit. A reality-bending axiom adept with an army of clone bodies to revive from when you killed her. Agenda asks in a stunned tone. Yes. Whose name you never learned because you kept interrupting at muzzle velocity. We're of the opinion that if your enemy has breathing room, then you've done something wrong. And whose reality bending was aided by the strangest axiom-infused thing you've ever, and I quote, blown the fuck up, and a literal fortune in refined Kutha. Agenda asks. Yes, if we were to strip it all off the walls, it should easily pay for all the defenses you've been planning with at least half of it left over. While the news of a very successful looting spree is always welcome, I'm trying to bend my mind around the fact that there's an advanced cloning facility on that ship. Yeah, that's going to need a delicate touch. There are hundreds of her clones in there, and we're not sure if they're all mental copies of her for her consciousness to inhabit, or if her consciousness takes the memories with it and they're all blank slates. And Franklin can't figure that out because his medical degree is currently written in crayon and he's busy making sure she doesn't wake up and start fighting all over again. Agenda's tone is very tightly controlled. She's either furious or trying desperately not to break out in laughter. That about sums up the situation. We're also hacking into more and more of the ship with help from the ground. Apparently there's a small cult about uploaded minds and things like that, the Church of the Digital Soul. We've set up communications with this ship and they're eating through the protections and giving us more and more access. Technically, they could probably steer the ship in themselves without our input at this point. They really seem to know what they're doing. I suggest we give them some official duties and they'd probably be thrilled at the steady work. If nothing else, they could easily get through the ship's systems. If they're who I think they are, then we'll have plenty for them to do. Oh yay! If ruling Vuxa has taught me anything, is that the most important thing a ruler can do is not only find a use for everyone, but make sure they're willing, if not happy, to do it. Not to mention, it tends to keep people out of trouble if they've got honest, steady work. Miles says with a grin, and there's a snort, followed by a giggle as whatever walls Agenda had finally break down and she puts him on hold. How are things looking? He asks Sai, who grins up at him. They'd found a closet with cleaning supplies not too far off, and the men who still had too much energy after the excitement and weren't going to be much help in piloting the ship had been put to use in shifting all the gore on the main bridge. The room getting cleaned had visibly made the Indian man more comfortable as they worked, and he was now at a calm and almost happy state. ETA 10 minutes to stable orbit. After that, the girls in the computer will help me bring the ship down to the yards where we can start to really go through this beast with a fine tooth comb. The descent should take us about a half hour to do things nice and slow, so we're out for a while yet. Sai answers calmly. I've also managed to get the scanners over here sorted. Marcus adds from one of the side panels. All 5 ships are under our control. The one whose power core we blew is being approached by a bunch of tugs. We've got a clean sweep and a complete win. Barely. We barely got the win. The snake bitch gave us all a nasty surprise and kept pulling out new ones. If Franklin wasn't an obsessive maniac about Axiom, then we'd all be either slaves to the bitch or dead as doornails. I don't like luck being the deciding factor. We need to step up our Axiom training again, Miles says, and there are grim looks all over the bridge. I suppose that means I'll be putting together some lesson plans then, Franklin says from where he's sitting with the Nagasha's head in his lap. The scene almost looks tender, if it wasn't for the fact that his right hand is literally glowing with power as he makes 1,000% sure she's not coming out of the coma, and his left is slowly wearing away the tattoo on the back of her head to make her next death a little more permanent. Yes, I want to be able to find that point where Axiom collapses and use it, Miles says, and Franklin clucks his tongue. There are few good ways to measure it. I can't really put it into numbers so much as a sensation, so it'll take a lot of one-on-one to get there, Franklin says. You haven't looked this up in the galaxy at large. I'd have thought you'd be all over it. I keep trying and keep getting distracted. The race that understands null the best and can quantify and detect it the easiest is the species most vulnerable to it. Then I get off track and later find out I've been staring at the picture of what's effectively a mathematical equation with tits for an hour. Can I buy a vowel? The hell does that even mean? Jake demands in shock, and Franklin sighs. They're basically axiom elementals, for lack of a better term. There was a huge religious undertaking by the Gravid faith some centuries back to mathematically prove that motherhood was the single most sacred calling that anything, even math itself, could bring about. I'm still trying to figure out what's religious dogma and what's actually useful information, but the end result was a new species unlike any before it. Effectively, they're a sentient fertility equation, for the lack of a better term. What? Marcus demands in shock. There is a species whose physical form is composed entirely of axiom and defined by math the way we're defined by DNA. It's goddamn bonkers, and just trying to figure it all out is like looking at how your computer's OS is put together, but only in binary. And they're effectively a fertility equation? Miles asks slowly to try and understand what Franklin is explaining to him. Yes, bipedal axiom omnivore 0 to 100 number 1, the Gravia. The race is made of axiom, so null is so obscenely dangerous to them that they've categorized it down to a point where they can detect where it will form naturally and counter it to try and prevent null from forming entirely. To them, cruel space is literal hell, and it's their race that had it officially categorized as cruel space. How often do you get lost trying to figure these things out when you research null? Miles asks. Almost every time. The static images of these women are odd enough, but they're in more dimensions than I can truly understand. These women are straight up just... Franklin drifts off. They're what? It looks like they're moving and growing and shrinking all at once, even when they're perfectly still. It's bonkers, Franklin says. Okay. So there's a race that's very weak to null and are rightfully scared of it, but have studied it. Got it, Miles says. Now, answer the question. Can you teach us to manifest null at will? Yes. But I want you all to know that you need to be really careful with it. Most women, it knocks out. A Gravia? Instant death in even tiny quantities. If they're a distance away, then it's a slow and gruesome death. If they're far away, then it's very, very painful, Franklin says, and Miles nods. Right. Keep the collateral down. Reasonable. Miles notes and Franklin nods. I'll go around and give you all some quick and dirty lessons. There are some powerful tricks I've figured out and a few that are getting passed around the Dauntless, which I'll help you all refine, Franklin promises before pumping his fist in triumph. And the tattoo is gone. She's at least partially contained. Good, which leaves us the question of what we're going to do with her, Miles says, and Franklin snorts. You've got an idea? You're the Duke. Justice on this world is yours and the captain's wheelhouse, Franklin says. He's right, you know. This is both a chance to set an example and to send a message, Marcus says. Of course that can go in all sorts of different ways. It might scare off some types, but others might take it like a challenge. Something to think about then, Miles says as he stands at ease and overlooks the entire bridge. Is this how the Admiral feels? Knowing that his every action could bring about peace or doom and lives could end or be preserved on the advisedness of his actions? You're thinking out loud, Marcus says simply, and Miles coughs into his fist and squares his shoulders. There's a snort of amusement that goes through the men as they start to descend down. Then Miles's communicator goes off. Yes? All right. We've got a bunch of the ships already down under our control. Yours is going to be on the absolute end due to that cloning lab. Our plans for that is to break it down and spread out its equipment over the planet for the hospitals in the major cities. And we need a tally at just how much Kutha is in that ship. Not to mention, we need to see if there are any recordings of that reality shifting. I want to see for myself what it was like, Agenda says, and Miles nods with a grin. And the fact that replays of Franklin's fights with Butcher Bitch and Thunder Thought are still being circulated, and you want to see if you can make lightning strike twice. Darling, if you can make money off of something, you should make money off of something. Not to mention, I want to see what happens when there are no rules. Pretty bullshit, to be honest. They got caught in a loop of I'm bigger than you, and then the other would go, no, I'm this much bigger than you. It was very silly, so we changed the rules around. Then we kept changing it until there was no more axiom silliness, and he was able to do his job of distracting her without something blowing up or getting shot. Really? In order to get them to stop being silly, you had to take away all the axiom? Yes, they're very silly people, Miles says with a teasing grin towards Franklin. Oi? He protests, and there's a laugh from Agenda. Well, now I'm even more eager to see it. Your re-entry vector is good. How much is due to your men and how much is due to the digital soul girls? We're doing our fair share? Miles asks. So, 1/100th? Agenda asks in a teasing tone, and Miles considers the level of skill his team has for piloting capital-class ships. Yes, he says, and she breaks off into undignified guffaws of amusement. Hey, we're a small team of soldiers, not a crew of pilots. A team of soldiers. We can capture a ship easy, but knowing what to do with it beyond reading the freaking owner's manual and try not to break it is beyond us. Beyond you. I, on the other hand, am learning. Sai counters with a smile from his position. And if you take your hands off those controls, I'm willing to wager the ship won't even shudder as the digitals guide it in. Shush, just let me have this, Sai says, and Miles chuckles.